What's up guys, my name is Matt Peters. Today we're going to be talking about 4 ways that you can make money as a student photographer and the equipment that you need to do it. So before we get into this video, I want to preface this by saying I'm by no means an expert, but I felt like it would be useful for other students, college students, or maybe even high school students, to hear from someone who has recently started transitioning into professional photography. I'll show you guys some of my photos as examples. I'll also point out some of my gear. The camera that you see behind me, that's the Canon Rebel T5, that's my B cam, and I brought some other lenses out to show you guys. My A cam is the one that I'm shooting with now, the Panasonic Lumix G7. That's a DSLR, and this one here is a mirrorless camera. I could explain the differences between the two, but that's a topic for another video. So what I decided to do was pick 4 subjects or genres that you can shoot as a student with a little bit of photography experience. The first type of photography is journalistic. This includes news, events, travel. Those are all things I consider to fall into that broad category. I think it's really easy to find opportunities to shoot journalistic style in college, especially, whether that's working for the marketing department on campus or working for a student newspaper or even local newspaper. What I think is the best setup for journalistic shooting is one standard zoom lens and one telephoto zoom lens. The standard zoom lens is going to cover most of your wide to mid-range scenarios, and then the telephoto zoom lens is for those scenarios where you can't get close to the subject. You know, in the back of the auditorium or away from the court, you can shoot with a telephoto lens from the stands and often get really good shots. Now, I shoot a lot of my journalistic photography with prime lenses. However, I don't really recommend that. Prime lenses are lenses that have a fixed focal length, so you can't zoom with them. They're stuck at a certain focal range. However, they're often less expensive, but also faster, brighter. They have wider apertures than zoom lenses. There are 2 reasons I don't recommend using them for journalistic photography. The first is that they add extra weight to your bag. With a zoom lens, you'll be able to cover multiple focal lengths. Prime lens, you need a wide angle lens, a mid-range, like a 35 to 50, and then a long portrait lens or telephoto lens, something that's in the 85 to 135 millimeter range. So you don't want to have all that extra weight because a lot of times the nature of journalistic shooting is very run and gun, where you're going from place to place and you have to haul all of this gear with you. The second reason that I don't recommend shooting with prime lenses for journalism, they're not very discreet. You're constantly switching out lenses when you're shooting with prime lenses. That can be really distracting if you're shooting, for example, in a lecture hall or an auditorium where it's completely silent and people are watching a speaker and you're out there swapping out lenses with lens caps, rolling around. If you like shooting with prime lenses like I do, you may want to throw in like your best portrait lens and then have your 1 or 2 zoom lenses. The second genre that a lot of students are able to make money shooting is portraiture, or portrait photography. Portrait photography is all about capturing an emotion or a mood. You're really trying to convey a certain feeling in your pictures. This is where prime lenses really come into play. You can certainly use zoom lenses for portraiture, and a lot of people do. If you have a really nice zoom lens, it has a wide aperture, but that's where prime lenses really excel. Prime lenses often have really wide apertures and they're not as expensive as a standard zoom lens. So if you know you're just going to be shooting portraits, you may not even want to spend the money on a zoom lens. You may just want to get a couple of nice prime lenses and still spend less than you would on that 2.5, 2.8 standard zoom lens. So kinds of shooting that fall into the realm of portraiture include senior photos, weddings, model photography, and this is where I want to take the time to talk about vintage lenses a little bit. So if you're a student, you probably don't have a ton of money to spend on the latest, greatest modern prime lens. This is my favorite lens that I own. It's the Canon FL 50mm 1.4. It has a maximum aperture of 1.4 and lets in a lot of light. You guys can see, I just opened the aperture. With vintage lenses, you just need to get an adapter. It screws on the back here. And with that, you'll be able to use these lenses that were made for 35mm film cameras on a modern lens mount. I use this on my Panasonic G7, which has a micro four thirds sensor. So you really only need one lens for portraiture. But if you're looking for a good set to have, I would say a 50mm, an 85, and then something around 100 or 135mm. Don't make the mistake of buying lots of flashes or lighting equipment. You don't need flashes. Use your natural light. Figure out ways to be creative with using the sunlight, with using even room light. Flashes have a very specific use, and you don't need them like a lot of people think. The third style of shooting I'm going to cover is corporate photography. Subjects that kind of fall into the realm of corporate photography are branding, web photos, in-house creative work. There's a whole realm of different things that can fall into that category. And if you're shooting corporate photography, a good setup to have is a standard zoom lens, an ultra-wide lens, and a portrait lens. Now these are three very different lenses, and the reason I think it's good to have one of each of these is because there's a variety of different scenarios you could be covering when you're doing corporate photography. So the ultra-wide lens is really going to come in handy for those room shots or building shots where you're walking around and they're just wanting maybe pictures of their facility and even outside building shots. That's where that's really going to come into play. And I'll show you guys my ultra-wide lens, the Optica 6.5mm fisheye. It's a 180-degree field of view. So personally, I recommend something more like 9mm or 12mm that's not going to be quite as wide as a fisheye. So it's not going to distort the edges, but it is going to give you a very wide field of view. And maybe we'll talk about that more in a future video. Now where the standard zoom lens comes into play is you don't know what to expect a lot of times when you go into a corporate shoot. So if you're just walking around the building looking for interesting shots, a lot of times it's really helpful to be able to just zoom in, zoom out on things, and you know that you're covered from the wide end all the way to the close. So if you're shooting a meeting or some sort of corporate fundraising event, that sort of thing, you can just walk around very much like journalistic shooting and just be prepared for whatever angle or whatever shot. Where the portrait lens comes into play is that a lot of times you are shooting portraits in corporate photography, whether it's candid, fly-on-the-wall type photos, or planned, posed portraits. You're going to be shooting people, photographing people. So it's good to have a good portrait lens in your arsenal. The fourth subject I'll cover is sports photography. If you're in college, this is mainly going to be varsity sports or even club sports. If you're in high school, that could be obviously high school sports. If you're in college, you may even have the opportunity to shoot D1, D2 sports, or even professional sports. So for sports, you're going to want either a telephoto zoom lens or a telephoto prime lens. We're talking usually in the range of 200mm all the way up to 500mm depending on what you're shooting. These are the most expensive lenses that you're gonna buy. The reason for that is that if you're shooting indoor sports, you need to have a wide aperture. Something between f2 and f4, and those lenses can cost anywhere from $1,000 to several $1,000s. However, there are two ways you can get around spending a bunch of money on an expensive zoom lens. The first, if you shoot a lot of indoor sports from the sidelines, you can get away with shooting with portrait lenses. Portrait lenses are often the length that you need and they have the aperture that you're looking for. Basketball is a great example. A lot of times you can shoot basketball from the sidelines with a 50mm or 100mm portrait lens. As long as it has autofocus, you should have no problem focusing on the subject, and it will probably be fast enough to work in the dimly lit basketball court. A lot of people shoot sports with their telephoto kit lens. I'll show you an example. This is the 75 to 300 millimeter telephoto lens that came with my Canon Rebel T5. Now this lens works great outside. As long as it's sunny and you're shooting outside, softball, baseball, soccer even, it will do alright. Where it struggles is when I go inside and try to shoot basketball or volleyball. There's just simply not enough light. This lens has a maximum aperture of f4, just isn't enough to expose indoor shots properly. So a few styles of shooting that we didn't cover in this video include product photography, nature, action, real estate photography, street photography, and also aerial or drone photography. Those are all also great ways that you can make money as a photographer in college, and if you have the opportunities and the equipment to do so, I strongly encourage you to do so. Maybe we'll cover some of those other topics in a future video, but I figured these four were the main ones and the ones that I have had at least some experience shooting as a student. So I hope this information was helpful. I hope I didn't discourage anyone who maybe doesn't have the money to buy this equipment. Above all, you should shoot with what you have. Develop your skills, use what you have, and become a good photographer. Like most people, I started out with an entry-level DSLR and 2 kit lenses, and I've since acquired a few more lenses, but most of what I learned was shooting with those cheap kit lenses. They're still good lenses, and you can still get great photos with them. But if you know what you want to go into, then it could be a great idea to specialize in one thing and base your lens buying decisions on that. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comment section below. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, go ahead and hit subscribe. I'll be posting more videos just like this one, as well as showing you guys some of the video and photography that I shoot on a regular basis. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope this was helpful.